is Techstrong TV.
Hello and welcome to Techstrong TV. I'm Bonnie Schneider. Climate change brings more extreme weather. This not only affects individual daily life, but it also impacts food prices and even the availability of what we want to order for dinner at a restaurant. Well, innovative solutions are more critical than ever for the food service industry. Today, we'll be discussing the role of AI, robotics, and automation to improve the efficiency and sustainability of food service. Joining me now is Nipun Sharma, CEO of SJW Robotics, who says robotic restaurant automation is a game changer for the food service sector. Appreciate you having here, Nipun.
A pleasure to be here.
Great. Well, can you begin by sharing a little bit more about your background and how you came to lead SJW Robotics?
Sure. So I've spent the last 17, 18 years in the restaurant industry. And Bonnie, I've done everything you can think of. I've run steakhouses chains. I've run vegan restaurant chains, Chinese, Middle Eastern, Indian. I've been an entrepreneur. I've expanded restaurant chains all over the world. I've been a public company COO. So really immersed into the entire business of the food industry. And, one of the things that really started disturbing us, to me personally, about 10 years ago was a shortage of labor. And in different pockets of different countries, we started noticing while demand keeps going up, nobody wants to cook at home. The supply side is kind of broken, and the labor is becoming an acute problem, in addition to sustainability, of course. So for us, we looked at automation to see how we could bridge that gap in the lack of labor. And I started calling up on food robotic companies to see if I could work with them, if the solution could work for us. Came back a bit disappointed and realized we're not quite there yet. So at this point, I coincidentally met my co-founder, an expert in robotics and automation, and we decided to go from first principles. How would we make the restaurant of the future? How would we check all the boxes of labor, sustainability, quality, accessibility, and start a restaurant from scratch? If we take away the human limitation of a restaurant, we can really stretch the boundaries on machine learning, on robotics, on AI. And that's how we sort of got into it. We started doing some initial tests. We did a sustainability study, a scoping study. Can this actually work? At that point, we raised a bit of capital, did a prototype. People got to come and see the machine. They got to kick the tires, press a button, taste the food. And then after that, we really started rolling and raising additional funds. Partnership with Compass Group in Canada and Donato's Pizza is really getting our business model in shape now.
That's fascinating. It really is what you imagine the future to be if you had to close your eyes and envision restaurants of the future. Our audience at Techstrong is very interested in AI and robotics as well. Can you explain more how you're using these technologies and what you're doing?
Sure. We in the restaurant industry, especially managing large chains, we use a lot of data, right, to predict our sales. We know there's a ice storm in Montreal. Maybe people won't come to your restaurant, so don't cook too much and staff accordingly. There's a storm in Florida. Tomato prices are 400%. Well, let's make recipes that don't include tomatoes. We try our best, with a few data points that we have that could be weeks or months old. What if we could do that real time? And so that's managing the supply side. Also the inventory, right? Food can expire if food is mishandled, human leaves chicken outside for too long. There's all these factors that come in that make our inventory management systems less efficient in a non-automated world. So we take away all these inefficiencies, look at data points that are real time. So for us, AI and machine learning goes into two categories. One is predictive maintenance of the machine. We know certain parts are being used quite a lot. It's going to break down. Let's make sure replacement parts are on hand. Person to come fix it is also ready and available during a downtime, and managing the food inventory effectively. We know chicken's expiring in 12 hours. Let's generate a promotion, 50% off your chicken dish. So managing all this stuff in a robotic environment, we can really push the boundaries. If you look at human kitchens, they're designed for the average human, right? Like 5'3", average strength. Let's make a restaurant kitchen so they don't hurt themselves, but they can make food really, really quickly. So if we take that limitation away and say, hey, what if my average human being was 10 feet tall and 18 arms and 4 heads and Arnold Schwarzenegger strength? My kitchen would look different, right? So when we looked at our kitchen, we decided to go on first principles. Here's the raw materials. Here's what the finished product needs to look like. Let's create a system using advanced robotics and automation to make that food without the limitation of a human hand movement.
So when it comes to automation of food, I was reading that different types of cuisine place different challenges. Now that's interesting probably for anybody that cooks. People have their preferences of what's easier to prepare, but I guess robots do as well. So can you talk about that, maybe using the example of Asian food versus Italian food, and what's easier and what's not as easy, and why?
So, when we first started our company, it was not meant to be a company. It was solving my personal problems in a restaurant kitchen. And because I had done pretty much every cuisine type coincidentally, for us, the hardest to automation was Asian food because of the variability of raw materials. If you think about it, there's sloppy noodles, there's chunks of broccoli, there's shredded carrots, there's flat snow peas. How do you measure all these? We had to invent our own sensor for doing all this stuff. So we figured if we could do Asian, we could do anything. If we can't do Asian, let's just leave the next generation to come up with a solution. And if you look at the quick service restaurant industry, we've become pretty good at managing operations at scale. And again, remember, we don't have the best employees applying, so the system has to be pretty strong. So in most concepts, there's a prep area where the food is, chopped to your specifications and placed in coolers. Then there's how do you heat the food? Is it a wok? Is it an oven? Is it a grill? And how do you garnish it? So it's a fairly linear motion if you think about how food is put together at a Chipotle station or a Subway. So we've taken those basic principles of the quick service restaurant industry. So every cuisine would probably have a different way of heating the core food, but everything else kind of falls in a very similar linear pattern. So we started, of course, with, I think, the most complex Asian food. Our second cuisine, which happens to be, I think, the easiest, happens to be pizza. It's a simpler process to cook. Conveyor ovens replace a complicated wok system. And then between these two ranges, I think we'll be able to do Mexican, Italian, Indian, everything else, because there's a similarity in all these things. There's some kind of a starch, there's some kind of a protein, there's some kind of a sauce, there's some kind of a cooking mechanism. So if you look at it from that perspective, the range of food cuisines, and again, we really think people buy food by brands. You don't buy a butter chicken from a Chinese restaurant. So we really want to partner with established brands. So the customers have an expectation you'll be able to manage, like Donato's Pizza. You know what the pizza tastes like, what the quality standards are. So when an automated machine is cooking it, we need to make sure that we can meet those customer expectations or exceed them. So we become really the conduit for brands to go autonomous.
Have you had, I'm sure you have with your testing, but customers not be able to tell the difference between robot made and human made?
So if you maybe you've seen our video, and the most proud, every time somebody's come to look at our machine and taste the food, they always say, "Oh my God, this is the best pad I've ever had." And that's what I'm most proud about, because nobody cares about your machine. People come here for food. If your food is not the star, you're not going to win. But no, I love to say our machine is very futuristic, but really, if you think about it, it's not a very mind-boggling format of what we're doing. In most restaurants, the genius comes from the chef's recipes. The robot is not really making the recipe. The sauces come pre-made. What happens in a controlled environment like a robotic restaurant is we don't make mistakes. We don't overheat. We don't over-sauce. So that means the recipes that are originally crafted by a great chef, they remain intact. So we'll be as good, if not slightly better, than the average restaurant using the same recipes.
And I read that some of your new self-contained units include refrigerated storage for up to 350 meals, including all proteins, vegetables, sauces, and starches that can make up to 60 meals per hour. Wow. Can you walk me through how that works?
Yeah, so a machine, the first section is the refrigerated part. There's 16 silos that contain raw materials and vegetables and proteins. There's 10 silos that contain liquids, a separate one for oil and liquid eggs. So when an order is placed, we pick up the raw materials. In an Asian concept, it typically goes into a blanching station to heat up the food before it hits the wok. In our case, it goes through a steam tunnel. That's triggered only when an order is placed. And then the food gets cooked and plated and bowled, comes to the lockers on the side. You tap your phone and your meal is ready. And we also model this to be a restaurant. Should have the same capacity of a typical restaurant, should generate the same sales as a typical restaurant. So 350 meals is what the sweet spot is. We could be slightly lower than that. We could be slightly higher than that. When you're doing 350 meals as a restaurant, quick service restaurant, you're on the higher end of what the capacity needs to be. Of course, that needs to be managed by the recipes. If I have 50 items, 350 meals, not a whole lot I can cook. If I have one item, that's 350 meals, that's very predictable. Also, the right balance in the number of menu items. And that's where, by the way, AI comes in to really support us and help us make sure that our menus are meeting the expectations, both in terms of shelf life and customer desires.
Well, food waste is one of the biggest in the world in terms of carbon emissions, emitter of carbon emissions. So in what ways does SJW Robotics technology reduce food waste and contribute to environmental sustainability?
So in the restaurant business, a lot of the food is wasted because of shelf life. Shelf life because your inventory wasn't effectively managed, or shelf life when the refrigerator breaks down in the middle of the night and you don't know until you come in the next morning. So when you're monitoring something 24/7, we make sure the inventory moves along properly, both in terms of stocking it so we can predict our sales smartly, avoiding food wastage, generating promotions if food is about to expire. So we can take all these precautions, or we can become better every day as we learn about the demand factors for our inventory. So that's one way we really put a big dent on reducing food wastage. The other thing we do for CO2 emissions is we don't use gas, so it's all induction cooking. And we did our initial study. We have 70% less carbon emissions compared to a comparable restaurant in the quick service space. And things, restaurants, the inefficiency comes from the equipment. Your air conditioning a restaurant is generating a lot of heat in the kitchen. And of course, the restaurants are designed for speed and quality, not for sustainability. That means in the Asian concept, you have a pot of boiling water all day to blanch your food. In our case, we generate steam only when the machine gets an order. It remains idle otherwise. So taking away all these inefficiencies, not having interior lighting and all that stuff, we're able to make a pretty big dent on sustainability of carbon emissions.
And that's something you wouldn't have already thought of. But one of the things everyone loves about restaurants is that they deliver, and we can get whatever we want whenever we want it. So how do you implement technology like this with home food delivery?
So that's the greatest thing and the greatest tragedy for the restaurant industry. I think in the last decade, the biggest growth has come from delivery, and COVID accelerated the inevitability. People increasingly love getting delivered all kinds of food, not just the old pizzas and stuff that we had before these delivery companies came into our lives. What problematic is delivery companies charge a pretty big amount for restaurants. It is not really profitable for most restaurants to engage in delivery, but you do it because you have no choice. And the reason is, food is only about 25% of your total cost. 30% is about labor, about 10% is occupancy cost. So in our model, we don't have any on-site labor. And we have a very small footprint, so practically almost no rent. So when we've taken away about 35% of the cost of a typical restaurant, we become actually profitable for delivery. So food in our restaurants, by the way, can be ordered on site on the screen, from your phone, from the Uber delivery app. We're agnostic. The difference is either you come pick up the food or the driver comes picks up the food. So we've actually made delivery profitable. And again, it's by taking away the inefficiencies and the massive costs a typical restaurant has. What if you could eliminate those costs? Again, food is only about 25-30% of your costs. Let's make sure that our numbers align with those costs.
That's interesting. And this was, I'm just curious, how do you manage security, though, if if everyone's a robot, to keep everything safe?
So our machine, by the way, had to go through an NSF certification process. Little details like, we have the locker systems where your bowl is ready, but there's a machine inside. People could put their hands inside and have serious problems when the machine hits you. So the design of the machine has been by default make sure that it's very safe for consumers. There's a wall between the robot and the food locker system, so you cannot really put your hand through it. And most parts of the machine are inaccessible by anybody except the engineers that come to service it. So, for example, our partners in Compass, they put in the raw materials like broccoli and chicken into the machine when the machine prompts you to do so. They change the HVAC filters when it's time to replace them, and general maintenance. And these initial machines are all going into Compass facilities like universities, hospitals, and office towers. They already have a lot of people working in these buildings, and we've estimated they'll spend a few hours every day to make sure that the machine, there's nobody that's dropped something. Of course, we have cameras and everything else to make sure that the machine is also safe from customers and vice versa. So the box is self-contained. The only point of access is the food locker for customers, and that's safely secured to make sure you can't really put your hands all the way through.
It's funny. I can envision this in airports and places where you get a lot of people, like you said, a hospital or an office building. Kind of a two-part question: is there any place where you envision this idea, this concept being where people might not think it's the most obvious place? And also, what do you see in the future? I mean, do you see we'll actually have robots taking orders? I mean, where do you see this going in the future?
Well, I think the obvious place for a lot of these robots is where you can find labor. So a lot of 24 hours facilities like hospitals and airports. So you mentioned airports, which is amazing because the labor costs in airports are significantly higher because the employees need to be vetted and you have to park your car, et cetera, et cetera. It's a more controlled environment. The demand in airports is obscene. And we've seen after COVID, not all airports have recovered. Many restaurants are operating at half capacity or simply closed down. First, the obvious places where the need is, where the labor shortage is very acute. And then it's about convenience, right? How close can you be to your customers? Because of a small footprint and because we're real estate agnostic, we can have restaurants where traditionally you couldn't have restaurants. So for example, in an airport, I don't have to be in a food court. I can just be closer to the terminal. How can we be more closer to everybody else? So I think the evolution of this thing, I can see every brand having a bunch of robotic restaurants to complement the existing restaurants. I can also see as we get better, as we get more technology on communicating with the customers, and we already have apps like Uber and loyalty apps from brands that we can communicate with our smartphones. Increasingly, voice technology is getting integrated. Our next iteration will actually you'll be able to ask the machine to make a certain food for you, ask about your personal allergens. A lot of that technology, and we're partnering with companies like NVIDIA that gives us access to voice generation and AI to make sure the communication between people is great. And again, order ahead. So you know that you're going to be in that area around 2:30. The machine will start cooking when it senses your phone is somewhere close by. So the convenience factor is going to be great, and accessibility is going to be great. So if we're in an environment with senior citizens' homes where they're not looking at a small phone, they'll be able to talk to the machine and get their orders ready. So I can see that advancement in accessibility becoming more interesting.
It really is. It's just it's fascinating to imagine, and I think it'll be great to get these meals to more people that maybe couldn't get them, and also solve the labor shortage that you mentioned and reduce emissions. So it sounds like a win-win. Nipun Sharma, CEO of SJW Robotics, thank you so much for joining us on Techstrong TV.
Thank you for having me, Bonnie. Really nice to be here.
Absolutely. All right. Well, stay with us on Techstrong TV. We're going to have a lot more coming up.